Welcome classic rock fans to another episode of New Album Review, and today I want to talk about Iggy Pop's album Free. This album of course is a follow-up to 2016's post-pop Depression. It's a very different sounding record in many respects. It certainly has a more introspective feel to it. And I certainly love the way that Iggy's voice sounds on this record. It sounds beautifully sort of weathered and matured like an old cheese or fine wine. Rather tired simile to use, but it's all I've got at the moment, I'm afraid. But his voice, no doubt, is it sounds strong, it sounds purposeful. It's a beautiful blend of the divine and the dirt, according to critic Simon Tucker. Certainly Iggy's voice is beautifully accompanied by a whole plethora of sort of shades and textures sort of sonically on this record. It's shades and textures that shake this album from sort of being pigeonholed in any way, removes it from the sort of archetypal sort of paradigms we'd associate with it being just a rock album. And certainly we have to doff our caps to the musicians used on this record. I mean, the guitar certainly contributes to the overall sort of mood and topography, crafting gorgeous soundscapes. And of course there's also the wonderful use of Leron Thomas's trumpet. I hope I've said his name right. The trumpet croons along with Iggy's voice, highlighting it as an aged and dignified presence. Overall, I think the musicianship on this album provides a kind of a melancholic ache to a lot of these songs. Nevertheless, he's still as rubbery as ever, writhing away to somewhat earthy and lugubrious songs about sex and cultural sedition in many respects. I mean, for 50 years now, Iggy Pop has kind of represented that sense of otherness. According to Rolling Stone magazine, he represents, if I may quote, freedom, screeching holy terrors into a microphone, smearing peanut butter on his body and generally lusting for life. With the Stooges, he sang I Want to Be Your Dog, but on this album it expresses an overwhelming desire to be free, set against the sort of sonic backdrop of sort of lulling trumpet motifs and beautifully played guitar lines. And that's not to say the old sort of Iggy swagger is missing from this record. If I may quote Rolling Stone magazine, the guitars simmer but never boil, the bass swells, the keyboards shimmer behind him, and all the while Pop flexes his baritone, expressing himself more clearly than perhaps ever before. This album actually arrived as an MP3 download last night, but I got to listen to it first thing this morning. I made some notes about some of the songs as I went through it. Hopefully you'll humour me and let me share them with you. One of the tracks that really stood out for me was Love's Missing. It sounds beautifully sort of spatial in many respects and sort of links into that idea of sort of freedom. It sort of, but it also speaks of sort of absence, sort of lyrics like love's screaming, love's missing. You're kind of dramatically embroiled in a sense of sort of emotional angst with this one. James Bond has a bluesy feel to it, has a great sort of bass line to it. I love the vocals on this track. They sound quite indistinct and subterranean almost. Lyrics like she wants to be your James Bond. I mean, it sort of hints at the sort of familiar motif of submissiveness, many respects, that he's certainly explored before. Dirty Sanchez is a track that I find quite disappointing in many respects. Maybe it'll grow on me, but he certainly seems to be singing about sex as he complains that online porn is driving me nuts. But is it just about sex? I don't think it is. I mean, if I may quote The Guardian, Dirty Sanchez, someone has had the brainwave of using breasts and penises as a metaphor for the inequalities of capitalism. The song, just because I like big tits doesn't mean I like big dicks. Rich man, make it stop. We don't all want the cock. Profound stuff indeed. But apart from that, a song which I consider to be a bit of a blip, there are some really sort of sublime moments in there. I love the spoken sort of word elements of it. I mean, We Are the People, which is used to express a sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. I believe it's a Lou Reed piece, isn't it? As well as, of course, Dylan Thomas, which is also recited for this album. For me, one of the finest songs on this album is The Dawn. I think it's incredibly poignant, beautifully and evocative lyrics like the darkness is like a challenger to all my schemes and orders, and forced good nature just to lay down is to give up. That kind of sense of not being resigned in many respects belies that kind of, or betrays that sense of rebellious spirit that lies not necessarily at the forefront of this record, but it's certainly still there. And the music, the beautiful sort of synth sort of textures adds, some very interesting shades to this specific song. I love that final line. if I may quote, "If all else fails, it's good to smile in the dark." It's quite foreboding stuff, really. Iggy Pop said in an interview, "Every now and then this voice in me says you're getting too straight, you're getting normal, you need some weird shit." Well, this record isn't weird shit, but it's challenging in its own way. It's a far cry from the stuff we'd kind of expect from Iggy Pop. It's far more reflective in that respect. It's a far cry from that sort of raucous shapeshifter of the Stooges, a performer that originally sort of dazzled us with his proto-punk writhings and sort of barbaric yop, a constant thorn in the side to the conservative Midwest. There's certainly a feel with this album he wanted to shake things up artistically. As I said, it does feel different from his last album. It has an almost eerie, sort of otherworldly sort of feel to it. I'm perhaps labouring the point too much there, I suspect, but we certainly get lots of exploration of the avant-garde and the arty stuff that Iggy Pop has been almost beguiled with, certainly since sort of post-Stooges stuff. But there's also plenty of raw to this record. I don't think he's forgotten that sort of grimy sort of garage rock that originally defined him. One thing I love about this record is the album cover. It's so evocative. You get Iggy sort of walking into the sea as the sun is rising. It speaks of sort of, has a vastness, eternal sort of quality to it in many respects. I think this is a kind of respectful nod to sort of Friends Lost, with sort of Bowie's Black Star in mind, I guess. For me, this album is very much about an emancipation of the spirit. That's not to say there aren't some challenging and sort of raucous aspects to it, and certainly there are elements of what can only be described as a sense of existential terror explored as well. But certainly they're not to the forefront, I think. Iggy Pop said this record just happened to me. Well, from my first listen, I would say, just let it happen. As I've said before, this album showcases Iggy's voice beautifully. He said in an interview that he's now got the voice he always wanted. It's a record that's evocative, I would even go as far as to say at times hypnotic. Certainly it's an album that certainly warrants another listen, and perhaps another listen after that. Anyway, you've been watching an episode of New Album Review, albeit a short episode of New Album Review. Do check this record out. Please click like, subscribe, share this video, do all of the above, and check out the Facebook page, of course, but more importantly, please do keep listening.